Hey everyone, what's going on? My name is Curtis Brooks. This is Entrepreneurship episode number 20, and we are actually doing something a little different. I decided to do away with the lower thirds or all that other jazz that I was doing there, and it was fun, but sometimes it gets a little bit distracting trying to do all this yourself, so I just wanted to focus on the content rather than trying to make sure all the bells and whistles were there and put on a better show for you. But nevertheless, today we're talking about what is your brand and story. Again, this is Entrepreneurship episode number 20. Last week, I had a really good friend of mine. He decided to join me on our show, and we talked about the power of your story. And it was with Art Jones on last week, Thursday, I believe. And just before the holidays. And so before we get started, I want to say happy holidays to you and hope that you guys had an awesome Christmas, Kwanzaa, happy Hanukkah, and all of those things, or whatever your faith or what you may be celebrating, and happy holidays to you all. But again, we're talking about on today, what is your brand and your story? In fact, there is a clear distinction, but yet a very fine line, and I'll explain that. Again, my name is Curtis Brooks. I am an entrepreneur, just like you are. I'm also a transformational speaker. And you may be wondering, well, how does that tie in? My background is I was a former associate pastor, and my background is in seminary. And I decided to take my faith and use my faith because it has changed my life so much, and use it to help others change their lives. So that's where the transformational speaker comes in, because by hearing a word or situations that have changed my life, I believe, not so much my story, but hearing situations, or again, looking at those things, learning how to look at life differently altogether, and realizing that through stories, your life and my life have been changed. It is stories. Whether it be our story or a story that we've walked in the middle of, not knowing who the players are, but nevertheless, it is a story that has changed our lives and in fact, given us our own story. So today we're talking about, again, what is your brand and your story? Are the two the same, or are they completely different? They are different, but yet there's a very fine line, and we're going to talk about that in just a few moments here. Again, my name is Curtis Brooks, your host here of Entrepreneurship. Trying to set my video up here. Host of this wonderful show, Entrepreneurship. Again, we're talking about what is your brand and your story. There is a clear distinction. Your brand is how others perceive you. I once thought years ago, I understand it differently now, but I once thought years ago that my brand was about my logo. Someone were to ask me, well, Curtis, what is your brand? And it has been asked of me, and only to find out that it was really a loaded question. And whether it was intentional or not, I found out that I answered absolutely, completely wrong. Because in my mind, my brand was, okay, well, here's my logo, here's my documentation, or here's my video, here's the podcast that I did. But in fact, my brand was how you, as my prospective client or customer, perceives me. It's how the public perceives Curtis Brooks. And likewise, it's how you, as an entrepreneur, are perceived by your client or your customer. And here's the thing. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. You don't have to be in business for yourself. Matter of fact, you don't have to even have a business. You don't have to even know anyone who has a business. Because in fact, we all have a brand, believe it or not. Again, your brand is about the perception of how others see you. It's not so much how you perceive yourself. Because when I was asked, well, Curtis, what is your brand? I had shown a business card. Well, this is my brand. This is my video. This is my podcast. This is any other thing I could have shown them. This is who I am. And in fact, that was the perception of how I seen myself. And how many times do we know that there is a clear distinction on how we perceive things, how we perceive ourselves versus how others perceive us? It took me a long time to understand that. And perhaps that's where you're at. Or maybe not so, but for me, it took me a while to understand that. And in fact, marketers have understood it for some time now, that your brand is not who you think you are. Your brand is who your prospective client, it's what they think. It's how they see you. That is your brand. And so often we're, again, giving out what we think is our brand, or what is our brand. We're giving that information out. And in fact, we are just so wrong about it because, again, there is a clear distinction, but yet a very fine line. And we're going to get into that, describing or explaining that fine line as to your brand and your story. So hopefully that is clear as relates to what is your brand. Again, your brand is how you are perceived. My brand is how I am perceived by you who are listening, by you who will view my videos, by you who look at my logo. What does my logo mean to you? What is just the videos? What do they mean to you? How am I coming across to you? What is your overall perception? And then likewise, what is the overall perception of your client or your customer? How are they viewing you? How do they see you? And let's get into the story now. Your story. I think it's important to be able to, again, make a distinction as to what is a story first. We've talked about what is your brand, and we now have a clear understanding of your brand and my brand being how others see us, not how we perceive ourselves to be, because I can perceive myself as to be a very nice guy, but put in the wrong situation or maybe the right situation, I may not prove to be so nice. And likewise with you. Sometimes life will put us in those different situations and we come out with something completely different from how we want to be perceived. But nevertheless, that difference is the very perception of how others will see us. So that is your brand, guys. That is my brand. How you see me, how I see you, how the overall the public sees us as entrepreneurs or as fathers, as mothers, as parents, as people, as a particular race, if you will. So that is our brand. So again, hopefully that is clear because I was missing that for a very long time. I didn't quite understand it, but now it has been clear through my own research, studying, and just learning. So it is absolutely clear now. So what I'm going to do is talk about story, understanding the 5 parts to a story. And in fact, this is how we should all tell our story. Our story needs to be logical. Our story needs to be succinct, meaning that it goes from 1, 2, 3, or A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth. And the reason why it needs to be succinct and logical is that so others will understand the story. And remember, again, it's taken me a while to understand that, Curtis, it's not about you. And I will say the same thing about what is said about me, is that it's not about you. It's about you making a connection, you and I making a connection with our potential customers. So we need to tell a story that is in a succinct order, that is in a logical order. Again, one, two, three, or perhaps in a creative way, going backwards, telling the story backwards. There's many different movies out there where the story has been told from a narration point of view. So it's been told backwards, and then you have the protagonist or the plot that is introduced at the very end of the show. So again, stories are told yet in different creative ways, but the point of it is that there are 5 parts to the story, and we must have an understanding of how those parts are played out and what exactly are those parts of the story. So that being said, I'm going to go to Sir Google and read a definition of, or different definitions of the parts, the 5 parts, the 5 essential elements of a story. Okay. And this comes from a website called, or its website is kazoo.com, and it's a PDF that I'm looking at, and it's called the 5 essential elements of a story, and one being the character. Okay, I'll read the definition. And I think it's absolutely important to understand this. Again, you start off with a character because we are going to tell this same story in the same fashion. We may have a scaled down version, but your story and my story, it needs to have all 5 parts, and it needs to be succinct, and it needs to be logical so that those who hear the story, those who see the story, even as we write the story, even as we prepare videos according to our brand, how we want to be perceived, we're telling the story, guys. Remember, we're always telling the story. And so how we are bringing our customer into this space where we are attracting those customers, it is through our story. Our customer is understanding our story. So our story needs to be in a succinct fashion and also logical. 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. A, B, C, D, so on and so forth. Again, making it logical. Characters. A character. The characters are the individual that the story is about. So the story that you and I will tell is going to be about us, but told in a way, not that it's given us so much, not the story that the story is so much focused on us. It starts off being focused about us, but it ends that I've learned something now. I've learned how to solve a problem. And that problem is hopefully the question that I'm answering for you. So that's the problem that we're solving. So here, the characters are the individuals that the story is about. The author should introduce the story and the character with enough information that the reader can visualize each person, the characters in the story with enough information that the reader can visualize each person. So as we tell our own stories, we need to be clear about who we are. Again, registering those defining moments, those aha moments in our lives as we're telling those stories. So the characters are the individuals that the story is about. The author should introduce the characters in the story with enough information that the reader can visualize each person. This is achieved by providing detailed descriptions of characters. So talk about who you are. Again, the emphasis is about you for a moment. But in the end, through great storytelling, as I mentioned earlier in the show here, I spoke with a good friend of mine who is a master storyteller. Stories are awesome and they need to have impact. They need to be impactful as we tell the story. So that character needs to be clear as we're talking about who we are. Right? So this is achieved by providing detailed descriptions of a character, physical attributes, and personality traits. Every story should have a main character, and you and I are the main character of our stories. We're obviously in life, we're all going to have a story. There are going to be the antagonists. They're going to be the protagonists. Those people who are with us. And the antagonists, those people who seemingly are against us. But as life happens, sometimes the antagonist, sometimes it starts off with the antagonist or that individual or people who are against us. But in the end, through our own perseverance, we happen to change their minds because we decided not to give up. So this is the power of your story. And this is why your story is so awesome. Because as it reads, the main character determines the way the plot will develop and is usually who will solve the problem. So you are the person who will solve the problem. I am the person who solves the problem of the story that I'm telling you. And likewise, you as my potential customer or client, I'm ready. I've learned from this experience. I've had that aha moment, and now I'm ready to solve your problem. Think about it, guys. So again, it is clear to understand that there are distinctions that build a story, that put together a story. There are clear distinctions. Again, there's the character. Again, going back to our definition, it says, however, the other characters are also very important because they supply additional details, explanations, or actions. That could be the protagonist. The protagonist can be the main character as well. But again, the other characters are important. Perhaps in your story, you are the main character. At least you should be the main character. There is the protagonist. There is the antagonist. There's the protagonist who's the ride or die person that there's always with you. There's always got your back. And there's the antagonist who is the hater, the person who's jealous or for whatever situation, whatever challenges. But remember, guys, this is your story. And you've got to compel, you've got to fascinate, you've got to draw your prospective client in to a space that they're captivated by your story. So, however, the other characters are also very important because they supply additional details, explanations, or actions. All characters should stay true to the author's description throughout the story so that the reader can understand and believe the action that has taken place. So your story must be believable. Again, that is the first portion of your story. That is the character, the setting. Again, all of these 5 definitions are absolutely important as you are telling your story, as you are sharing your story. Again, I'm just breaking down the definitions, the 5 essential components to a story that should be there, that should always be there. Perhaps your story may not be so long. Again, we're just going into the definitions, going into the details of your story, of how your story should be succinct and in a logical fashion as you are telling the story or as you're writing the story, even as you are preparing videos. Okay, so now we're looking at the setting. The setting is the location of the action. An author should describe the environment or surroundings of the story in such detail that the reader feels that he or she can picture the scene. Again, making sure that your prospective client can visualize the very space that you're in, that your client, your prospective client is right there with you. They are being drawn in. It is a compelling story. You have set the scene, the setting, if you will, the stage. All right? So unusual settings such as a fantasy world, and perhaps it's not a fantasy world. Perhaps it is the truth, but nevertheless, it needs to be a compelling story, compelling setting that has your potential client or customer captivated. Not only by you as the main character, but the setting. All right? So that is the setting. The setting is the location of the action. Where did it happen? Not only where did it happen, what did it look like as it was happening? What did it feel like? Again, all of these actions and this information, the details are absolutely important to you drawing your customer into your space, you creating that funnel, that sales funnel, if you will, captivating your audience. Your audience is your customer. Your audience is your client. So again, we talked about the setting. The setting is the location of the action. An author should describe the environment or surroundings of the story in such a detail that the reader feels that he or she can picture the scene. Unusual settings such as fantasy worlds can be interesting, but everyday settings can help a reader to better visualize the story and feel connected to the plot. Again, this is all about making a connection to your audience. Your audience is your client, your customer. All right. The plot. This is the third portion, the third item that is essential to your storytelling, to my storytelling. Again, this is how we draw our customer into our space. This is how we create that sales funnel. Again, guys, knowing that there are 5 essential parts to a story, and your story must again be told in a fashion your story is in a succinct fashion and also in a logical manner, that it makes sense to the reader, that it makes sense to the listener, or to those who are watching your videos, and to those who are potential customers, right? We're talking about the plot now. The plot is the actual story around which the entire book is based. Again, not only books, but you as an entrepreneur, what is your story? Everyone has a story. Even before you decide to become an entrepreneur, everyone has a story. And perhaps it's not your story, but such is life. It's someone else's story that you've been born into. You're fighting someone else's battle, fighting your way out of someone else's situation. But your story essentially becomes their story. So there is a plot to every story, guys. All right? Remember, here's the plot. The plot is the actual story around the entire book. Video, audio, podcast, your written work, your blog, your website. All of these things are important. All right? The plot should have a very clear beginning, middle and end, with all the necessary descriptions and suspense called exposition, so that the reader can make sense of the action and follow along from start to finish. Again, there is that logical order, being succinct, meaning that it makes sense. There is a rhyme or reason to why you are putting the story together in such a fashion, because you want to draw your audience in, right? And then every story needs conflict. There is the antagonist, all right? The person who is, or individuals, or a group of individuals who are against you, or life circumstances that are against you. Every story has a conflict. So that being said, our definition of conflict is, it says every story has a conflict to solve. And this is you and I as entrepreneurs. We have a conflict to solve. That conflict could be the story that you were born into. That conflict could be making a product or creating a service that's going to help others make life easier for them. So there is a conflict. There's a question that you and I have to answer as entrepreneurs. All right. So every story has a conflict to solve. The plot is centered on this conflict. Again, it's like building something. We're building something. And there's an order to how we build it. You don't build a building without creating a foundation first, for which that building will stand on. So that when the wind blows and challenges in life happens, that building is not going to be easily moved. So you have to create a foundation first. All right. So Conflict. Every story has a conflict to solve. The plot is centered on this conflict and the ways in which the characters attempt to resolve the problem. You and I, as entrepreneurs, we have questions to answer. And perhaps those questions for you are the challenges that you've gone through in life, the challenges I've gone through in life. And how you answer those questions and the time you spend on trying to get the answers to those questions, you're going to be that much more valuable to those who have the question that you've already answered. So again, conflict. There's always going to be conflict. We all have a story, and every story has conflict, guys. And it's for you and I to answer those questions, to resolve the conflict that arises in our lives so that we can be of a better service to mankind, not only to our own individual lives, but to the product and the services that we will offer. Making a better product. Again, resolving a conflict. Creating a better service. Again, resolving a conflict. And finally, resolution. Resolution, guys, we got 4 minutes. This has actually been an awesome show here. Resolution. Every story has a resolution, meaning that there was a problem initially, which was a conflict. The conflict, we get the climax. That's what I neglected to mention. So within the conflict, you have eventually a climax, a situation that comes to comes to a boil, if you will, like placing a pot of water on a stove, and eventually the water comes to a boil. So it is essentially like a climax of a story, the conflict. So there's a conflict that arises, and that conflict is also called climax. All right. So the climax of a story, meaning that the water or the situation has come to a full head, if you will, and now we've got to solve it. We can't go any further without solving it. So that's what our job as entrepreneurs is, that we are solving problems for the masses, guys. All right. So resolution. The solution to the problem is the way the action is resolved. And they give an example here. For example, Katie often resolves a conflict by finding a compromise for two fighting characters or helping fix any mistakes she's made, which while switcherooed into someone else. Okay, so that's just some commentary, but nevertheless, how you and I will resolve the conflict in our lives, our own personal lives, how you and I will come to a resolution, meaning that that conflict in our lives, those challenges in our lives has now come to a complete boil, if you will. The water is boiling and it's about to start boiling over, and we have to do something now. And how we resolve that matter is going to be in the very product that we create. It's going to be in the very service that we create. Thank you, Tamika, for joining. I appreciate you. Thank you. Today, I've been talking about what is your brand and what is your story. So again, there is a clear distinction between brand and your story. But nevertheless, I'm going to answer just that distinction in just a few moments. Now I've been talking about the 5 essential parts to telling a story. Every person on earth has a story. And in order to compel our potential client or customer, we need to tell our stories in a succinct fashion, in a logical manner, so that those who hear the story, those who listen to the story, those who see the story, those who read the story, that they can make a clear distinction of where the story is going, how the story begins, what is the middle part of the story, if you will, where who is the character, what does the setting look like. Again, we're just kind of rehash the 5 essential parts to a story. So again, as entrepreneurs and business owners, we're telling a story. Stories sell, if you will. Stories sell. And so as we're telling our stories, there are going to be 5 essential parts to a story. That is the character. Who is the character? And we are the character, because eventually we're solving a problem. We're the main character. What does the setting look like? Again, we're telling this story over and over to the point that this story gets better. it gets more interesting and it gets more compelling to those who are hearing and listening to the story, to the point that they are convinced, they are compelled to tell our story as well. They're brought in. Again, they're affixed, they're captivated. So the 5 parts that are essential to a story are the characters, the setting, the plot, the conflict, and eventually the resolution. How you, as the main character, resolve the problem that has arisen in your story. And now, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, how are you going to resolve my problem? This is the situation I had gone through. This is my story. And so because I was able to answer the questions that arose in my life, and though there was conflict, though there would be eventually resolution, I was able to solve my situation, and rest assured, I can apply the same tenacity, be empowered in the same fashion to solve your problem as well, Mr. Customer or Miss Client. So that is what the power of storytelling is about. Is that, again, making sure that we are telling our stories in a succinct fashion and in a logical manner, meaning 1, 2, 3, there's character, there's a setting, there's a plot, there's conflict, and there's resolution. And again, I've only went through the definition of each of the 5 components that make up a story. Again, every time you, as an entrepreneur, you will tell your story, it needs to be you as the character. You need to provide a setting. You need to provide a plot, meaning that there is a protagonist. There's the person who is with you, the ride or die person. There is the antagonist, the person who doesn't like you for whatever reason. And though you and I are trying to move forward, again, there's a ride or die person, but there's an antagonist sometimes who has his or her way. And so regardless of those who are with us, the antagonist sometimes has the tendency to break through the barriers, the challenges that we're already facing and wreak havoc, that much more havoc on our lives, and making it, or at least appearing to make it more difficult for us to get to our end goal. Again, as it says in this definitions I've given you, is that those characters are equally as important because those characters will help eventually sell you as a person who has the wherewithal, a person who is qualified, a person who is the authority. So you and I are essentially selling ourselves, our story, if you will. And here's the clear distinction. Though, again, brand and your story are different, there is absolutely a fine line because our stories make up who we are. Our stories make up who we are. And though we may perceive ourselves to be one way, our potential customer or client, they perceive us to be completely different from how we see ourselves. So again, how you see yourself is your perception. It's part of your story. Again, you are the character, main character in your story. But how your potential customer or client will see you, that is your brand. Back to the fine line. And so as we change our perception through transformation, if you will, there has to be transformation in order for you to change your perception. Because if you change your perception, you can change how others see you. You change your perception through greater understanding, creating different habits. You create a different perception by thinking. As I shared with a friend of mine a little while ago, is that in order to change your situation, you have to think your way out. You have to, my friend, you're going to have to think your way out of this. You can't rely on the old information. So that means that you have to you have to be able to be wise enough to take in the new information in order to think your way out. So that's how you are going to change your perception and eventually change your brand. And as you are changing your brand, you may leave some people behind, if you will. You may absolutely leave some people behind. Again, we all have a brand. Whether you're in business or you hope to go in business at some point, we all have a brand. And that brand is the perception, how others see us. That is your brand. That is my brand. It's how others see you. It's not how you see yourself, because as we know, there can be absolutely two different things. There's two different mindsets there. I can think that I'm so awesome, and yet another person doesn't see me as awesome. Or I can think that I'm not so awesome, and another person's, hey, Curtis, that was a good job. So again, there are clear distinctions between your brand and your story, but yet a very fine line on how the two are connected. Lastly, again, if you can change your perception through transformation of your mindset, if you will, transforming our ideas, transforming the information from yesterday to what is today, deciding to take a different look, if you will. It is all about perception. It's all about perceived value. All right? It's all about perceived value. So again, guys, I want to thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Tamika, for being a part of our show. I appreciate you for chiming in. And if you have any questions, Tamika, I would be happy to answer those questions for you. We've been talking about, again, what is your brand and story? There are absolutely clear distinctions between your brand and your story. Though they're obviously different words, but yet your brand and story, there is a fine line. Because if you can change your perception, you can change your brand. So your brand may obviously, or is obviously how you're perceived now. And perhaps that's not what you want to do, or that's not the perception you want. And so it's important to understand sometimes we might have to go away for a season and perhaps hop off of Facebook for a season and come back stronger and better. So guys, wow, this has been an absolute awesome show. We are like 8 minutes over. I've absolutely enjoyed this show here. And my name is Curtis Brooks. For more information about me, you can check out my website. That's going to be www.imcurtisbrooks.com. Again, that's www.imcurtisbrooks.com for more information about me. And as you have seen here on our video in the lower thirds here, you can contact me on Twitter at imcurtisbrooks.com, or excuse me, let me get that right. I apologize. At I am Curtis Brooks there on Twitter, and also on Facebook, it's going to be the @ I am Curtis Brooks. And on YouTube, you can contact me. I will more than likely be sharing this video on YouTube. You can find me on YouTube at Curtis Brooks Transformational Speaker /coach. Again, that's on YouTube at Curtis Brooks Transformational Speaker /coach on YouTube. And finally, last but not least, you can contact me on LinkedIn if you so desire. Our email is going to be bookme at I am Curtis Brooks. Again, that's BOOKME at IamCurtisBrooks.com. That is our email address. So send us an email. Let us know any suggestions you might have in regards to the information that we shared, or a previous show that you've watched, had questions about, or a show in the future. If you just have any questions that you'd like to get in contact with me, we will definitely be happy to answer those questions. Again, that's going to be book me at imcurtisbrooks.com. We're here each Tuesday. Wow, kind of weird here. But anyways, we're here each Tuesday and Thursday from 11 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Again, each Tuesday and Thursday from 11 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Central Time. You'll find us here on Facebook Live, and we will chime in with you guys on Thursday at 11 a.m. So until then, we will see you later. Ciao for now.